Jason Malbis and William Papageorge, two Greek people that had immigrated from Greece. They were in Chicago, and they traveled throughout the Midwest and southern states to look for land, to have a place to express their culture and their religion.
They were willing to give up their own individual gain for the good of the community.
They started the nursery, dairy, turpentine, timber.
Yeah, they had a good life because they didn't want to do but eat and work.
They were all from different families but operated as one family, using their culture and their religion to form a community, or commune, if you will.
No one was better because I am over here, the cashier, and the other one is over there washing dishes.
We was all just like brothers. There wasn't no separation or nothing at Malbis.
Because they didn't marry and didn't have children, there was a little problem of people were getting older.
There was just nobody left.
So they brought in a bunch of young people.
The expectation here was to experience life as they had experienced it.
You're not expected to marry. You're expected to work.
One by one, they're going away.
I look around me and I saw what all these people put together.
Whatever they wanted to do, they accomplished. The great love they had for each other and the unselfishness, this dream still goes on.
This is the home place of Jason Malbis. The home doesn't stand, but later his brother built this home in the 1920s. As Jason grew up as a young boy, they sent him to the monastery Megaspilion, which is about 20 kilometers from here.
This monastery is the oldest monastery in Greece. Its history began from 4th century. The monks were very good educated. So Jason perhaps came here for education.
He embraced the religious aspect as well and became a monk and of course stayed there. Whether he decided that he could do more good, a greater good, by leaving the monastery. What we've heard too, that he left the monastery because he didn't agree with some of the doctrine. I think he was just a real enterprising man, liked leading people, liked helping people, and by the effect he had on people must have been very charismatic.
Jason Malbis in the early 1900s came as a part of a contingent of people to come and see how American businesses were run. The Greek government sent them over.
Jason changed his name from Markopoulos to Malbis, the location, a small town in England.
He ended up in Chicago, and at one point I think he decided that he wanted to stay in the United States to help his compatriots in their struggles, starting new lives.
William Papageorge was a school teacher interested in the improvement of the Greek people as they immigrated. They got as far as Galveston, Texas, I believe, and then started traveling east.
They arrived in Mobile. They kind of liked the area. It probably had familiar climate to what they were used to in Greece.
And in Mobile, they saw an advertisement for farmland for sale in Baldwin County, 200 acres for $5 an acre.
Back in those days, you had to go by boat to Mobile. This was 1906. Because of the isolation, land was cheap here.
They saw the virgin pines and the beauty of Baldwin County, and they were probably running out of funds.
So they bought it.
The earliest Malbis members came to raw land.
At this specific area, there was only one farming family that they stayed with while they built their own house.
They had to fell the timber that was, on the land to construct all of the buildings, and it seems that the big house was the first major construction project in the third year of Jason Malbis and William Papageorge being here.
And they brought other people in. At first, none of them related.
It was difficult in those days. They either worked on the railroad in New York and ate a mustard sandwich or really suffered. So this was a haven. This was a harbor for all of these immigrants.
Mr. Malbis, he sent back and get 5 or 6 at the time, 5 or 6 at the time.
The greatest influx of Greeks came from over there during the early 1900s. They would come and then they would write to their relatives that they had a job and they could get a job for one of their friends or relatives.
The Papageorge family and later the Gregors and the Papases.
When we came, it so happened there were burning stumps and there was a lot of lights, So my mother said, this must be a nice town. To her surprise in the morning, it wasn't but just the home of Mr. Malbis. My mother told my daddy, what in the 7 heavens? You brought us here to starve my children? Well, every beginning for everybody. Because here I found 2 other little girls, Nafsika and Antigone. So I had somebody to play with, and so it wasn't bad for me.
Nafsika Mallers and Antigone Papageorge were both orphans. Nafsi being orphaned because of her mother dying early. Her father was an import-export guy from Chicago and was a big investor in the plantation. He felt like he couldn't raise her by himself in Chicago, so he left her, of course, here. Antigone was adopted by the Papageorge family. She was of some German descent. Marie Starkey was their primary caretaker, but I think the whole group seemed to embrace them and raise them as little girls. Marie Starkey was a school teacher from North Dakota, and she came to the school system here. The superintendent introduced her to the Malbis family. They took her in as a boarder at first. She liked the environment here and stayed on and conducted the business during the cannery and the correspondence that was required and kind of became the manager, I guess you could say.
Mr. Malbis, he did a little of everything. My father and Mr. Jason Malbis were good friends. I never did hear him and my daddy talk no foolishness. It was business. What they said in them days, they did. Well, that road right there wasn't like it is now. It was a mud hole. When it would rain, people would get stuck. And I think I pulled out enough cars one day to buy me a blue serge suit. And my daddy and Mr. Malbis cleared this road all the way past where I lived down here through the swamp.
They started the nursery, dairy, turpentine, timber, ice house.
Sheep, goats, a huge barn.
And they had a canning factory.
3 buildings were built for the cannery. It was a large operation, employed several hundred people.
The canning factory was, besides the potato crops and corn crops, the first enterprise that they launched into. Vegetables packed in a European style were then sold to markets in Chicago and New York. Next was the sawmill. Like everything else, out of the necessity for that enterprise, the timber to build buildings.
They put the first electricity in Baldwin County. We were used to a lantern, and when we got electric lights, it was so bright you couldn't hardly see it. Well, we're used to that much light.
They kind of taught themselves to manufacture electricity through steam. This building was erected in 1922 or 3. Most of it built by the brick that they made here. Cement molds created these large bricks that you see here on the wall. After the electric plant was up and going, they saw the need for ice, especially to refrigerate their own foods and products. So this addition to this building is what we call the ice plant. This room in particular was where they cut the ice on this conveyor belt, shaped it into different sizes by the order that people requested, and then it was delivered on horse and buggy. These rooms, of course, were insulated with cork, as you can see. All of this was built by the old-timers, and it's remarkable because they didn't know anything about engineering necessarily. And of course, the architecture, too, is very Greek primitive, I guess you could say, such as these shapes of these windows. And this door, too, is pretty fascinating. They made it to accommodate the ice blocks. Like everything here, it was so utilitarian that you have that form follows function idea. We're in the refrigeration room, and we even have some examples of the refrigeration plumbing that existed. This was probably the third enterprise that the founders undertook to make money and also serve themselves, which lent itself to really creating a self-sufficient community.
All that was done in order to occupy the people they brought from Greece and not to be a burden to this country. It was like a large family.
They all spoke mostly Greek. So until they began mixing and mingling and learning the language, everyone just stayed together.
They took care of their folks. They didn't have to worry about whatever their needs were.
If you stayed in the family, you would be taken care of. You might get a modest nominal salary, but all of your other needs would be met.
You go to the doctor, you just charge it, and at the end of the month, they'll send the doctor a check.
They had a lot of hardships. I'm sure there were some misunderstandings the way these people lived.
That dining room, we had a dining room full of men that everybody would work here, ate dinner here. And that place would be full of men. Nobody married.
Whether there was any rule against marriage or not, I don't know. But when they married, they were not basically considered to be in the family, so to speak.
If you did get married, you wouldn't be part of the group. You wouldn't have that security blanket, if you will. Their point being that, when you have a family of your own, your loyalty would be focused on your family rather than the group.
When I was working, all the Greek people, they men and the women, they would get $25 a month. That was their allowance.
The Greek mentality of hard work, of helping each other, helping their families.
It always is strange for everybody to actually understand how could so many people work together and have no difficulties.
They was not here for the accumulation of riches. but to work and do without, as they did.
The fact that it was very communal lends you to think that the people were very religious, that they were willing to give up their own individual gain for the good of the community. Jason Malbis was a very religious man.
They called him Patriarcho, which is little father, and put their faith in him in more ways than one.
The thing is that there was no jealousy, or I am better than you.
I guess they loved one another. You know, together you stand and apart you fall, and Mr. Malbis kept them all together, and they stayed together.
My Uncle Perry worked at the Grunwald Hotel with Manoli Lambrakis, his busboys, waiters, whatever. Mr. Malbis, William Papageorge must have been in New Orleans, found these Greek guys there and come and told them that they were building or had a little Greek community going on in Daphne, Alabama. A little while later, he brought over his mother and father, my grandparents.
A lot of people say that Jason was real intuitive in seeing what potential people had, or at least cultivating their interest a little bit.
They weren't necessarily what they had been trained or skilled at before they arrived. Some may have had some skill and training in what they were doing here, but for the most part, they learned them as they went along.
The main story was Manuel Lambrakis and his interest in the nursery business.
The nursery was one of the more successful businesses. It was started in 1927, I believe.
The nursery exported from here camellias and azaleas and grafted many varieties that are registered with names of the people here and favorite customers Mr. Lambrakis had.
It was 200 acres, probably had 5 or 6 60-foot long greenhouses.
There probably wasn't a nursery in this part of the country that could touch this place. I mean, it was a fine nursery.
Well, it always amazed a lot of people, and of course me too, but it was a community that just had everything in it. You know, they had electricity, they had water, they had ice, they had dairy.
In the 20s, after the causeway was built and had access to Mobile, they built the bakery.
There was a little bakery right outside where the ice plant is.
They carried it to Mobile by boat.
And then the next thing I know is that we opened the bakery in Mobile, Alabama.
That was by far their biggest commercial venture. At its height, and I'm talking about in the 40s and early 50s, you know, my guess is that Malbis Bakery hired 200-300 people. They built a fantastic building down there. They delivered by truck all over, you know, southwest Alabama, over into Mississippi, northwest Florida. A very prominent Mobile family owned a competing bakery, a very successful bakery. And I think they were always a little jealous of the Malbis competition.
You know, at first I think there was some territorial issues of these Greek guys coming into our marketplace. And instead of viewing competition as something that would create a better product for both of them, they kind of viewed it as taking too much of their market share.
Well, it was a terrible rivalry. Who was going to get the coffee cakes out? Who was going to get this type of coffee roll out?
We had 5 bakery routes in Pensacola. You had to watch what you was doing. I kept checking up short. I was an old country redneck boy that figured everybody was honest. The first place I worked in town in Pensacola was a big fruit stand. I came in one morning and one of Smith's men that worked the place, he caught him punching holes with a pencil in my pound cakes. They were easy to run. So I went over on the Smith's shelf and I pulled everything down off of it and threw it on the floor.
What a lovely girl. Pearly teeth, soft skin. skin, beautiful hair. Of course she's popular, just as popular as the Malbis milk loaf bread she eats at every meal.
You couldn't buy finer bread if you were a millionaire. Remember, the Malbis milk loaf is made with 100% pure milk. No water, no substitute. Try Malbis milk loaf bread tomorrow. Fast delivery trucks rush to your grocer daily.
It costs no more.
As I got older, my father, because he did not want us mixing with boys, men, would only allow us to work at Malbis Bakery because the office at that time was usually the uncles and Auntie and Nafshi.
Miss Mellors, that little lady over there, and Antigone, they were in charge of the office.
Auntie was more outgoing, very sweet, very pleasant, but she had a limp. She had fallen and broken her hip. She was a tall lady, and when she limped, it was noticeable.
3 of them, Antigone, Nafsika, and Bessie, they sent them to, back then it was Visitation Academy in Mobile, the Catholic girls' boarding school.
They were the first women we remembered working professionally. This was back in the late 30s, 40s, running the bakery with the men.
I was born in Mississippi, Sugar Lock, Mississippi. My mama moved here in Alabama. I had 2 children. My husband was dead. I had one baby walking when he died, and the other baby wasn't walking. And I had to work. But they was nice. Wasn't too much money in the job, but I lived all right.
We was all just like brothers. There wasn't no separation or nothing at Malbis. So Malbis was just a family. We ate at that big house over there. We'd go to the house and eat 3 meals a day.
And we would get called to lunch or supper by dinner bell. And there was a pump outside that you would prime.
They didn't live like rich people. They lived like poor folks. So many days we'd have beans and bread for dinner.
And Mr. Malbis participated in everything. For them to see that he was able to do whatever was there.
Jason Malbis did live in a dorm room just like all the other members of the Malbis Plantation.
There was just one solid bathroom, and I remember the floor being concrete, like showers, not necessarily tubs, but showers.
You go to work at 3 o'clock in the morning time. You get finished up about 6:30, 7 o'clock. You go home, you take 2 hours rest. Then you come back to the dairy, you get your truck, wheelbar, and then you go down here to the silo and go to get your silo, digging out that silo, getting it. Then you go to the feed house and sack your feed for them and take it to the barn and put all that. It was fun. A lot of work was in it, but it was fun. We enjoyed it.
My summers and my weekends were spent here. This was like heaven. A lot of restrictions, but a lot of freedom.
Auntie would take me to New Orleans when I was 10 years old and give me $10, and I'd go to every movie house on Canal Street while she went shopping.
The cows and the horses, the cemetery that we would go to as children and walk from the house to the cemetery and eat the fruit along the way.
Greek flags next to the American flags on the 4th of July.
Of course, they spoke Greek, cooked Greek food.
We would kill like 4 lambs on the weekend and have a feast. I ain't never had no lamb taste like that. Didn't know what lamb was for.
The boys would cook on Sundays. We knew we were gonna have boiled meat, potatoes, and a soup.
The aunts and uncles, they were very much willing to put some Greek folk music on, and we danced, aunts and uncles and children together.
Gulf Shores was the place to go to weekends and spend the day and swim, sometimes go early, make breakfast out there.
Uncle Philip would say, well, y'all better be ready by 5 o'clock Sunday because we're going to go fishing. We would take a picnic basket full of fried chicken and bread and Greek olives and feta cheese.
They were real proud of their ethnic background and their legacy, and they did want to maintain their culture.
I think that because the Greeks had to struggle so hard to maintain their religion and their ethnic part under the Turks, that they didn't really want to give it up when they came to America. They wanted to just kind of bring a part of what was Greek to them.
You always had the Greek food. You always had the Greek language being spoken. At the Pink House, everybody spoke Greek.
Everybody stayed with their kind, I read. They didn't all fool the American folk too much. And the American folk didn't know too much about them.
We were not allowed the freedom that I thought that our American friends had.
I was invited to a party from my school, and I said, can I go? No, you can't. We don't know these people.
I don't know that it was just the Malbises. Our parents were that way. They wanted us to maintain the language, keep our Greek customs and traditions and our Orthodox faith. So all of our friends, our close friends, were those we grew up with in the Greek community.
I had what I considered, I had 12 grandparents and 12 grandmothers. You know, they all raised me. The only strictness was about it, you had to take a bath and behave. Yeah, they had their rules when you got up in age. They didn't want you to date and stuff like that when you got in high school.
The way they based their morals was from the, Greece in the teens and the 20s and the, whatever, and the U.S. in those years too. And so that's how they kept their line.
Because it was so embedded into you don't do anything wrong, There was music, there was education, there was, you wore gloves when you went out, you didn't chew gum.
But that's just the rules. You had to go by them, but the door was always open. When you had enough, you could take off. My brother was 5 years older than me, and he jumped on a train one night. I guess he was about 12 or 13 years old, and went to Texas.
Could not have friends. The only thing they were allowed to read was the good book and their school lessons.
I don't remember having really a social life in the sense that of what probably most people would think of. The social life of the plantation was work.
They also were culturally minded. They played music. One of the men, I think, wrote plays, and they all acted in them.
They seemed to have all the things they needed. They worked together. They enjoyed working. They were always pleasant. They were always happy. The fact that they lived as a family, how they made it work, I don't know. I just know it was a great operation and it was successful.
My understanding is that Mr. Malbis left the States about 1936, and he went back to Greece.
I think he intended to come back. He communicated a lot with the group while he was there.
He got trapped by the German occupation of Greece.
It was a very hard life with the German occupation.
We went through Germans, through Italians. It was a starvation. We have no food.
In Athens, people were starving because they didn't have some place to plant food.
They had curfew, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock. As soon as you got home, you have to stay home.
He had an olive oil refinery, and he would send my mother on excursions on the train. He would give her cigarettes to give to the Germans to bribe them so they would let her go, and she would deliver olive oil to soothe their stomach with what little they had to eat.
He was helping people there, and encouraged these folks here to send money, send aid. He had a few chances to come back and didn't foresee that he was ill himself. He developed colon cancer. His opportunity to get back and take care of that here didn't exist, so he ended up dying there. Maybe in one way he wanted to get back to his homeland and die there.
I would tend to say that that was a loss. And I don't know that it really was ever really filled. And be like a driving force that's diminished, maybe not entirely gone, but diminished.
All the people here, they had great faith in Mr. Malbis. Some left and many remained. Things were carried on the same.
In the letters that he wrote back, there's a lot of talk of please try to see each other as brothers and to discourage them from dissension among them. But he was such a strong leader, I believe his absence, left everybody looking at each other saying, well, who's going to be in charge?
I think everyone tried very, very hard to fulfill his dreams.
For years, they would talk about Mr. Malbis like he was seated at the dinner table with them. He had a tremendous influence on them.
He's really very much still alive all over the place in here. Everybody who knew him, they loved him.
They all seemed to still stay together and still kind of move along in the direction of keeping the status quo. They invested in trying to contact people such as my parents to come in the early 50s. Jason was my grandmother's brother, and he lived in Greece with my grandmother and mother.
I still remember the Statue of Liberty. It was awesome. We drove up right in front of this, what we call the big house, or the pink house. It was always painted pink. All the uncles were out front, and they were just grabbing my mother and kissing her and hugging her because they knew so much of her. And I, being 9 years old, was like, I don't know if I like this.
My father's two brothers is in a family. They told me that time if I like to come to the United States, to come to Malbis Plantation. So I say, okay, go ahead. And so I come 1955 here, July 29, in New York City, by boat.
During the war, when I was 5, 6 years old, and we have no food to eat and no place to stay, and my uncle was here. And then during the time when I was to the army camps with a little tent and beg for the leftovers, I decided to communicate with my uncle Tom here and ask him if he could please take me to America.
My mother's brother was a part of Malbis, and we asked that he help us. My father was taken a prisoner of war, and when he came back, our finances were, the country was bankrupt, essentially, Greece was. And my uncle offered to help me with my education, to go to the University of Alabama. So I came in the early 50s, and I went to the university.
A few years after my family arrived, there were young people that were brought over to live here and to, in my understanding, to take over and follow in the footsteps of those that started it.
I remember hearing that they were going to bring, a group of young people over. Probably because they, foresaw that at some point they were going to be needed.
Once the older folks realized one of the flaws of not getting married is not leaving behind any heirs, they didn't have anybody to take over some of the businesses, like the electric plant where parts were harder and harder to get. The people running that had not groomed or educated anybody to succeed them, so when they got too old to run it, it just closed.
They brought a number of young people from Greece over. The idea of working them into the various businesses, the bakery being the largest one.
Constantine Papageorge, the man in charge after Jason's death. By then it was a corporation.
He interviewed young men and women, like 18 to 25. Some of them maybe had a poor background, very much need to come.
I don't know if he handpicked them or he knew these families and just said, there's an opportunity. Everybody was still looking for opportunity here in the West.
Frank Boykin was then the congressman from this, well-known congressman from this district in Alabama, and his help was solicited. And anyhow, they worked out a deal to, well, all these people came over.
Came over. This was still a very rural and agrarian lifestyle, and some of them were from Athens, more of a city.
I guess they were put under the sort of the strict work rules. The Malbis expected them to work hard and maybe not to play too much. I don't know.
Accommodations were modest and lifestyle being strict. By then, the gentlemen in charge of them, so to speak, were older and kind of clashed instead of, embraced.
If you not be a parent or live with the brothers and sisters, you don't quite understand the way the young people feel.
They wanted to work their 8 hours and be free to go to movies, to date, to go to dances and that, and they didn't want them to.
All the people that belonged to the plantation, the older ones, had come to a country that only paid them, 5 cents for a job of a day long? They were used to hard times, hard work, no recreation.
You're not expected to marry. You're expected to work. You're expected to be a part of the family life and the religious life at Malbis. That may have been too confining.
Once a week, we'd all sit here at this table. We followed passages from the Bible in a series as we went along.
The biggest flaw of that time was that they weren't willing to change with the times or didn't know how.
The expectation here was to experience life as they had experienced it and to continue living the way they lived.
I think they kind of stonewalled themselves with maybe not even realizing it.
Even when I came back out of service, we made $25 a week. That's what we made. And that was it. Some of those people thought just because they got to America is a land of honey, it's supposed to be $500 a week and a brand new automobile.
They were all grateful to have been brought to this country because Greece at that time, right after the war, was not in real good shape. But they left.
And eventually, I think there were only one or two that stayed. There's one lady here, Ms. Eugenia F. Taxa, I believe. She was in that group.
Yes, my mama said, my child, where you go? You have half body. Okay? Americans have strong people to work. Where you go, you? I become so skinny. My body 82 pounds. Have now to look at me, I have almost 50 pounds. I work every morning, come over here in the morning, 8 o'clock, eat a little breakfast, take my shot, my medicine, anything to do. Can start in the kitchen. She's not cook. This you have another old ladies to cook. I help, wash the dishes, fix the table, with the bread, to this, to that, I like to sing all the time. My uncle said, sing this, is good for me. Σιγά σιγά κι αυτό το βράδυ στα σκαλοπάτια σου για λίγο θα σταθώ. Σιγά σιγά μες στο σκοτάδι ένα παράπονο της νύχτας θα σου πω. Μη μου κρατάς κλειστή την πόρτα, βρέχει ο Θεός και θα βραχώ. Άνοιξ' αγάπη μου σαν πρώτα, να μπω κι εγώ να ζεσταθώ.
One by one they gone away. Some going to California, some going to Chicago, New York, all over, get married.
Very quickly they all left. And when that happened, it discouraged Malbis because they didn't have the young people to take over and so forth. And I think that's largely why they sold the bakery, because these people came and left.
Clearly, by the time they got older, by the time they got these young people and lost them, and they saw, what we're doing isn't working, but they didn't know what to do, really.
Jason Malbis had wished for a school to be here, a hospital. He wanted progress, and there was still time for progress. The bakery was sold. They were living here full time. The house here was remodeled to suit their needs.
And when the bakery sold, they got into small service industry like the gas station and the restaurant and the motel.
Well, it was a nice service station, and it had a bay in the back there where they had a mechanic. Mr. Nick was up front taking the money.
I remember the old wooden restaurant and hotel they had across the street there. You didn't have one between here and Pensacola, Florida.
It was on Highway 90, and that was a main artery of traffic from Jacksonville to Los Angeles.
So the highway was really the most important thing to get it through Mr. Malbis' property.
Of course, by then they owned, the land in this area. They owned about 6,000 acres. The folks were instrumental in assisting the highway department, even in clearing the land.
We had many dinners, many entertaining people. We had the governor of Alabama here. He helped us an awful lot. So many people.
Highway 90 was real viable. Through the 60s, the restaurant was full service, linen, cloths, flowers on the table. They were still getting bread and fresh products from the farm to use in the restaurant, so it was very successful. They more or less gave me the keys and said, this is the front door, and here's the cash register, and here's the back door. Most of the counters were filled with souvenir items. They had those little things that you turn upside down that moo. And as I learned more about the restaurant business, I realized these people were either out of date or out of sync with what was going on. We had certain employees that were part of the scene here, or family, quote unquote. I had one waitress, Thelma, that did not know that when you ask, how are you, is rhetorical. And so she would go on to tell the customer how she had stomach trouble that day and her back was hurting. And some of the state-of-the-art features that we carried at the motel to accommodate our guests were things like teletrip, and you could dial in here the city that you were traveling to, how many miles it takes to get there, where you might be able to stop along the way. Getting to know the guest on a level where they wrote cards back to the manager, Sam Pappas, and the staff. The motel was just your typical 50s style place and had a charm of its own. The Alabama-shaped swimming pool has been one of my personal favorite things that we've had. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. All those businesses started losing money, and the old-timers, you know, one, for a need for something to do, and also to just not admit that they're failing, you know, kept them open. It was difficult on me to know what was happening and yet pretend it wasn't happening. We weren't in the hotel business anymore, and there were people doing it far better than we could, and we didn't have the traffic. I couldn't encourage my folks to put money into it to rehab it, so we closed it. And they just kind of kept on trying to maintain until they could come up with an answer. And they were kind of looking for guidance, I guess. But there was nobody to compare to Jason Malbis and his type of guidance.
We children had a choice to maybe take the places of Auntie Papageorge and Nancy Mallers, maybe to stay celibate, you know, and not marry, and maybe somehow continue in some manner part of this, what could be salvaged. We were free to choose, so we chose marriage, and of course that was okay.
I was attracted to the other life, the other world, and being involved in that life to a larger degree than I was able to by being part of this commune. There was a plan for me to go to Auburn University to study horticulture, ornamental horticulture, the purpose of which was to return to Malbis and take over running the nursery. I enjoyed the experience of going to school. I enjoyed the experience of being away from the plantation. Before I knew it, Uncle Sam was knocking on my door. Vietnam was going on. I chose to enlist and to go serve in Vietnam. Came back, decided that Malbis Plantation was not the place where I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
This was a fine nursery and a great facility. And Mr. Lambrakis just got kind of tired, and he didn't want to fool with it anymore. He lived in this building rather than living in one of the other houses. You know, he kind of lived by himself, but he just made the decision that he wasn't going to do it anymore.
Well, I was in the hospital during the time the day went down. The electricity was bad on it. We had a guy, he was just, you know, a jackleg, carving around. He thought he knew everything, you know. And they told me after it happened that they kept hearing something popping all night that night. And that morning about 2 o'clock, it just lit up in a blaze.
So there weren't too many new enterprises, I guess, to really drive or push things along. And then about the 90s, you know, you started getting people from Mobile coming over and, we love the schools in Baldwin County.
As all the men died and it kind of disappeared, the women that were left behind took over, and the timing of real estate kind of became something that could keep them going, and so a lot of the lands were sold and developed.
I moved to New Orleans, and it was concrete and steel and barren. And I would come, you know, as a married person, I would come and walk out here, and there were tears in my eyes because it was just green, and the trees were there, and nature was here, and you could pick up the violets, and you could walk down to the creek. I didn't realize until I became an adult how much I gleaned from becoming morally the human being that I hope I am. And a lot of manners and lessons and things that, because I had to adhere to what all these adults were telling me.
They was nice. I worked for them and raised my children. My girl went to college. Miss Auntie always looked out for her. When there was school time come, they bought all my children school clothes and all. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
What was traumatic for me then were expecting 3 funerals a year. As they got older, they came to the realization that it's over.
Today, of course, we do have a church that's remarkable in architecture and artwork and has become a landmark. When Jason died, his last letter expressed, "I hope you continue and build a church."
Mr. Gus Papageorge spearheaded the building of the church. Most of the churches in Greece are quite large and elaborate.
They literally copied a church in Greece and then brought material from Greece to build it here, imported the artist and his apprentices to paint it. The scale that they actually did build the church on was influenced by the sale of the bakery. Probably was.
The iconography of the church was done by one man. He came here with his father and completed the whole church. Shortly after the church was completed, he died.
The businesses died down. Everyone in their own talent had passed away and no one took over their place. But the church would always remain and it would keep something forever.
The importance of Malbis, I think, is just found in the nature of people that have a common purpose, a common goal, and are virtually self-taught people that seem to achieve something greater by doing it collectively.
I've often wondered what all these people put together through a lot of hard labor, and it was like each one of them had a child and they nurtured this child, like Uncle Steve nurtured the dairy and Uncle Emmanuel had the nursery, and worked and put their lives into it and then just faded away.
I think really the importance of documenting this is that it was a typical immigration story. They had overcome so many obstacles. It was an expression of their faith and how proud they were of how far they had come.